Excellent.
I've
Do you know who
always
you're riding
wanted
with?
to do that.
We can set that up for you. Yeah.
I know, but all the liability, I don't know if you want me in a car.
No. We'll swing around and talk to the chief and we'll just get you set up.
That's all. Nice
Good
to
luck.
meet you.
Nice to meet you, yes.
All right. And so we'll have a contest to see which first-tier sub.
I'm gonna start the recording.
Regional first-tier suburbs. Get the freebies. Which are all kinds of things.
Yes.
They go this way too.
Yeah.
3 axes.
No, my daughter goes to Seattle here.
Well, we'll call the City Council study session to order for October 29th, 2018. The first item on the agenda is roll call.
Deputy Mayor Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Shortly.
On his way.
Councilmember Trump Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wells.
Here.
Okay. Any announcements, reports, or I guess we're going to have presentations, huh? The first one on the list is item 3A, and that's sound transit update.
I'm just going to do a quick introduction for this one, and then I'm going to let them actually handle the presentation for you. So you may recall that over the last year or so, we've been talking about the Sound Transit Access Improvement Project, which is basically the second garage for the station. And the last discussion we had was about placement of that, preferred placement of that garage. So Sound Transit is getting ready to go forward with the next steps in the process for their design process, and so they wanted to come and give you a brief update and go over what they're going to talk about at tomorrow's public meeting. And over to you guys.
Thanks, Ingrid, and thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. I'm first of all going to introduce myself. I'm Katie Druhl. I've met some of you before in a previous capacity, but in this capacity, I am the new Government and Community Relations Coordinator for the South Corridor, officer in the corridor, and focusing in South King County. So you'll be seeing me around a lot. Today I'm going to hand it over to our project team leads, Jason and Melissa, to talk about the access project, which is the garage and the non-motorized improvements that will go along with it. And as Ingrid mentioned, we have an open house tomorrow night. We'll be back in this room actually to welcome the community to come in and get an update on the project. We don't have any decision points at this point. We are just providing an update to the community since it's been a little bit since we've been out. And we have an online open house as well. And as a preview to the results of the online open house, people want more parking as soon as possible. That's the summary. So I'll hand it over to Melissa and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to provide to the council and the mayor an update on the Auburn Access Project. I'm Melissa Flores-Sachs. I'm the Project Development South Sounder Director. And just to give you a little bit of introduction of myself, I'm also fairly new to my position. I've been at my current position since February of this year. But I've actually been with Sound Transit for the last 20 plus years and the original predecessor with King County Metro. And so I've been working on sounder projects for since the beginning of the agency, and actually I was part of the original team on the Auburn station and Tacoma to Seattle corridor. So very familiar with the corridor, and so again, thank you for the opportunity. And so I'm going to introduce you to Jason Suzaka, who also just joined our team. And so we have a full complement sounder team on board, and he'll provide you an update on where we're at with the Auburn Station Access Project and on our next steps moving forward. So, Jason.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So good evening, everyone. Jason Suzaka, I'm the project manager for the Auburn Station Project. Just a little bit about myself. As Melissa mentioned, I'm new to this position, but I'm not new to Sound Transit. I've been with the agency for about 13 years. South King County born and raised, and I'm also a user of Sounder service here. So I'm very excited to be here on the project and to provide you all with a briefing of the where we are with the project and to talk to you about the open house that we'll be conducting tomorrow. So as mentioned, some of these concepts that you'll see in the slides here, they're not new. We'll have more information to share with you later next spring, we'll be conducting another open house to introduce to you some of the results of the environmental review work that we've been working on. So, further ado. So this first slide is just basically who is Sound Transit, mentioning some of the various modes of transportation that we offer, Sounder Commuter Rail, ST Express Bus, Link Light Rail, and Tacoma Link. And this next slide is basically showing where we are with expanding the system and where we are going. Sorry, I can't get it all on here. It's a little small font.
Just focus on the South Sound.
Yeah. So this slide is where we start to get into some of the meat of the presentation. So this is the preferred site that's currently under evaluation and under environmental review. The site was identified by the Sound Transit Board and recommended by the Auburn City Council in November of 2017. It's located about a couple blocks away from the existing station at 1st Street Northwest and 8th Street Northwest. So this is the proposed garage right here, and then down here is the platform and the existing garage. This next slide is basically telling public what we've done to date. We've had a couple of open houses already with over 120 participants. And the City of Auburn's Transportation Advisory Board met 4 times and provided input. And as I mentioned earlier, the Auburn City Council recommended the garage site here on 1st Street Northwest and 8th Street Northwest. So this is the schedule. Maybe I can blow it up a little bit here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so some of the major milestones in this phase. Currently, we are in the conceptual engineering phase, so roughly about 10% design level. We should be completing this phase around the first quarter of 2019, and we'll be completing the environmental review process next spring 2019. We'll be having, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be having another open house to share the results of the environmental review and other information with the city and the citizens of Auburn next spring, and then eventually this will lead to a board decision on the project to be built shortly thereafter. So that should be completed in 2019. Preliminary engineering through final design will be completed by 2021, and then we're looking at construction between 2021 and revenue service beginning in 2023. Here, so this next slide is just kind of a fun exercise. It's just meant to see where our commuters are coming from. They'll have a chance to put like a little sticky note showing where they live. It's not meant for any research purposes, just kind of a fun exercise. And this next slide is just an isometric view of where the project site is relative to the existing garage and the tracks.
Can I ask a question?
Councilmember Trout.
Thank you for doing this. You just mentioned that you have the areas where people come and park here. Could you share with us who are those people that park in these parking stalls?
So we get a lot of commuters from, of course, around Auburn. Some, I believe, come as far as Covington and parts surrounding Auburn. We're also providing outreach to the residents of Auburn in general that may not necessarily use Auburn Station, but live around the area.
So do you get that, so you get that information through zip codes, or how do you verify who parks there?
Yeah, we do we do a, that's not really a traffic survey, but it's more like kind of a license survey.
Annual survey.
So we can see where folks are coming from.
Who are parking at the garage, and then we have other ridership data that helps us to identify most people who use these facilities are driving their SOV and then getting onto the sounder. And so then we have that data, license plate data for that, and then we have some other data for people biking in and pedestrians. I can connect you with
Okay,
some more
thank you very
information.
much.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next slide. So here's the garage, the proposed garage. We're looking at, this one we're trying to show how folks can go to and from the train platform and the garage. We'll have some staircases, of course, and elevators. Folks can access the station a couple blocks away. So another one of the items as part of this project is that we are looking at some non-motorized improvements. So essentially improving pedestrian, bicycle, and bus access to and from Auburn Station. So we're having our design consultant take a look at some various options and preliminary evaluation. And then once that's completed, we'll be in a position to talk with both the city and with King County Metro on which projects we'll be able to fund and construct. So, so among those would be some bus stop improvements, some better pedestrian zoning like crosswalks, that sort of thing, and bicycle improvements, I should say upgrades, station. So that's pretty much it. Again, this is just meant to update the public on where we are with the process. And again, we'll be conducting another open house in the spring, and we'll be in a position to share more information with both the City Council and with the public on the project.
And just to clarify, the information that Jason just presented is currently online, and this is the same information that we'll bring forth at tomorrow night's public open house.
Sorry, lock up.
How many stalls, parking stalls for automobiles are you projecting at this time?
So at this time, it's approximately 535.
That's in addition to the existing surface parking that's there too.
So you're talking about,
So
on the sites?
535 is the net increase in parking stalls.
No, the structure itself is just 535.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Trout Manuel?
On that map, you showed something about bicycle stalls or
Bike lockers?
lockers. How many bikes can be stored there? And how are they going to be encased for safety?
So to answer your first question, I'm not exactly sure how many we have. I can get back to you on that. So we are looking at some upgrades, looking at some items like smart lockers that will provide more efficient use of renting out the lockers. You concerned about security,
Yes,
theft?
theft, you know, how big are they going to be and how many?
Yes, so currently our bike lockers actually is by lease, and it's an annual renewable lease for lockers. But our bicycle program has found with research and studies that people are using the bike lockers more than for bikes. And usually each bike locker can hold one bike. And so with this new program that Jason noted about the smart lockers, our bicycle program is going to go through the procurement process later this year or early next year to purchase new bike lockers, where it's kind of the smart, what we call smart lockers, where you're being charged by a certain amount of time, and you will put a code or a credit card. And so that the use of the bike locker is really intended for commuter use. You come into the station in the morning, you put your bike in the locker, you go to either Tukwila, Kent, or Seattle, come back in the afternoon, and then pick up your bike locker. And it's kind of a self-serve program where we don't have to do this lease, because what we found is the bike lockers aren't being fully utilized for the original intent of as a bicycle lockers. And so it's kind of like the Lime bikes that they're in Seattle. You just put in a code, and then you can ride the bike for an hour or so, and then just park it, and then.
But no one can get to them where they can take a tire off or something like that?
No, it's going to be
Okay.
an enclosed,
Okay.
but we do have bike racks, but mainly we're going to have bike lockers per se.
Councilmember Wales, then Councilmember Pelosi.
Okay, thank you. I'm surprised that 535 seems kind of on the light side for something that we are building to be open in 4 or 5 years. What do you see currently as the rate of growth annually as it relates to the need for parking stalls? And have you taken into consideration that we are very fortunate in Auburn to be developing a mega medical center, which is going to have increased needs? And I know their garage over there is pretty full. And so I'd like to know what you anticipate the increased need for each year is. And have you evaluated, are going to be loss of some of the parking over here? That's one question I have, and I'm sure you've got charts that analyze that. The other question I have is the parking garage going to have restrooms? And is the parking garage going to have security that's paid for by transit? Because I hear some concerns over in the other building. And my third question is, what are we going to refer to it as, north and the other building south, or the new one and the old one, or A and B, so that we can start, planning for the future and getting excited about the new one? Thank you.
So to your first question regarding the cost and the number of stalls, so Sound Transit has a budget of $60 million, and so we're kind of confined to that budget, and that also that budget includes for all phases of design. That's including the actual property acquisition, the design, the environmental mitigation, if there's any environmental mitigation required as outcome of the environmental assessment, and then also going through doing a competitive construction bid process for the construction. So we had to design the facility designed to build by the budget, and so currently that's where this 535 stalls is kind of assessed where the budget is. I mean, if we, so we're confined to that. As for the rate and growth rate of parking stalls, we are confined to the number of stalls based on our budget, but we can provide some additional, we can go back to our consultants team on assuming on their the growth rate of the use of the parking stall or the parking garage, or what the assumptions are. As for restrooms, the current plan is not to have restrooms. We do have restrooms on our trains, and so that also reduces, for maintenance, there's a maintenance cost associated if there is a restroom in the garage. Sound Transit's preference is not to have a restroom. As for security, we are designing to what we call a CPTED, crime prevention design standards. So our facility, our new garage will have cameras and kind of design lighting, so to deter any potential security issues in the area as well. And as for signage, actually, to be honest, that's a good question. We'll have to bring that back to the project team. And we do have a signage group in our design and engineering department. So we'll probably get a lot of good advice from them on how to assign the facility from the existing garage to the current garage. And I know that we didn't speak to it, but in our planning department, what we call our planning and innovation division, they're already are starting to think about what they call parking demand technology. They're going to be hiring a consultant team to also take a look at an opportunity where to put some sort of parking demand signage where, if there's only 10 spaces left, maybe the other garage maybe, have more spaces. So it's not currently in this design, but we're not going to preclude any future technology that our planning and innovation division can install down the line. And so we're going to make sure that we don't preclude that technology to be installed.
Thank you. What was the cost per parking slot for the first garage? Because taking the 60 million, this figures out to be about 112,000 per slot or parking spot. What was it for the first garage? Do you recall?
I have to admit, I don't, but we can find out that information. That was also a design build project by PCL Construction that did that for us.
And finally, is there an anticipation of charging people to park in there? And is there still a plan under discussion to charge people for parking in the old parking garage?
So we have a parking committee, I guess you could say, that would evaluate whether or not we would charge at the new garage. So that's something we'd have to look at. I know that we have a carpool permitting program, and for some of our facilities, we're looking at an SOV permit program as well.
And that would be with the charge?
It would be, not necessarily for this garage, but just system-wide.
I'm going to defer to Mayor Backus for a quick one here.
Thank you. If I could on a few things. First, for council, it's been a while since you probably saw all four of the sites, but if you'll recall, the site over here provided the greatest number of parking spaces that was within the budget that was allowed through the Sound Transit budgeting process. So that is where you're getting the most parking spots available. And when we're talking about paying for parking, if you consider, as they were saying, we have people coming from outside of the RTA area, the Regional Transit Authority area, that are not paying into the RTA, there is certainly consideration for having them pay to park in that garage. So that's a topic that the Sound Transit Board will continue to discuss. And there are other opportunities for permit parking, as they were saying, for carpooling. There are permits available in some locations, and part of the reason that we're even looking at paying for parking is because of the success of the program that Auburn implemented downtown for individuals willing to pay to park, because that first parking structure is full by about 6:30 in the morning. So I think after the discussion with council that first time, you all agreed that the parking over there gave you the most options for parking the greatest number of people in the mornings.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Can you go back to the schedule chart, please?
Sure.
So, I come from the old school of Gantt charts, where you get more detail than this. Is it possible for you to give us a Gantt chart for each of those 3 areas? So
Sure.
we can see more detail in your planning?
Okay, yeah, we can check with our scheduling folks.
And I'm talking about the major elements, you know what I mean? Just so we can see specifically what goes on in 2019 through 2021. And I think it would really measure many of our future questions. Now, I presume that under your 2017-2019 planning, that will be all of your permitting activity?
Yeah, that would include on up to 2021, presumably.
Okay. Well, you could, that's an element then that you could throw in.
So that's, if you see under 2019, 2021, the second bullet, obtain permits. So the permitting process is in there.
Yeah, but I believe you just said you'll be doing some permitting requests up into 2021. Did you say that?
Yeah, so what I meant to say was, so we're starting work with the city staff right now, and then from between now through to before we start procuring the contractor, we'll be working on getting permits, all the required permits and necessary right-of-way for the project.
You know, like under planning, you'll be probably selecting a construction company during that phase?
Not during the planning phase. What we will determine is
Oh,
the
that's right.
the
So it'd be
construction.
probably into the design phase. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Trout Manuel, did you have another question?
They answered it, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Okay, first of all, Gantt charts aren't that old school because I love them. I use them often. Jason, the bottom bullet on that, Spring 2019 Sound Transit Board selects project to build.
Yes.
Could you explain what that really means?
Sure, it's part of our board process. So, so last year, the Sound Transit Board selected the preferred site, and what we mean by the project to be built will be it'll be so many levels with approximately so many more like the programmatic elements of the project is what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
And just to also add, so our board process is we have to complete the conceptual engineering and the environmental review. And then depending on the results of the environmental review, if there's any environmental mitigations that's required. And then as part of the public outreach process, we also have to give the opportunity for the public comment. And then we will come back to City Council to present our results of our environmental review and then also then seek our board of directors of approval for the project to be built.
So the actual project has been approved, it's just that
The
now
site
we're getting into
location.
the details now.
That's correct,
There
sir.
might be other things that pop up.
So,
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
so you said this is going to be a facility where the individuals that park there are going to pay for this, or we haven't decided yet?
That has not been decided yet.
It's still discussion. There have been no definites about anything, but when we're talking about pay for parking, when you consider people that are outside of the area that pay for Sound Transit as part of the tax,
Right.
and we're able to vote on Sound Transit 3, they are getting to ride Sound Transit at a subsidized rate, right? Because if we were to charge what it costs per ride, people wouldn't ride it, so
Right.
it's subsidized.
Okay.
So when you consider people who aren't paying anything into the system come in and take Sound Transit, there should be some cost to them. They should be paying back in some way, shape, or form. And so the opportunity to pay to park in that garage is something that we have discussed as one way to do that.
Any other questions so far?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Look forward to seeing the next iteration.
Thank you.
Katie, welcome to the new job.
Thank you, thank you. Thank everybody.
Send anything about it?
Yes,
Thank you.
yep. I'll be back in your inbox again in the next couple of days.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Road Ad Hoc Committee report, and which was chaired by Councilmember DeCoursey and with members, Councilmember Yolanda Trout-Manuel and myself. So we'll turn the meeting over to Ingrid Galb here.
So I don't know if Claude, as the chair, if you want to do any kind of kickoff for
I
this?
think just to quickly here, and you and Shelley will be covering a lot of this, but first of all, I want to provide a thank you to Ingrid and Shelley, and especially to James Webb for all the hard work he did, including responding almost immediately to our request to have a more simplified way to read the tip. And it was a matter of days, he had put something together and provided that back to us again. We did go through quite a bit of an extensive process here, and I kept the folder on it. So we did go through everything in great detail, and that's why we mentioned this was not going to be a short-term ad hoc committee, and we wanted to take the time that was necessary to review in detail and then come up with elements that we thought were very presentable to the rest of the council. And that brings us here tonight. But again, for Ingrid and Shelley, thank you very much. And you're actually going to be doing most of the presentation here, and I'll be filling in a little bit at the end of the process here.
So just as a little bit of background on the ad hoc, so the ad hoc committee, as I understand it, met about nine different times over the last several months. During many of those meetings, they discussed and reviewed the 2018 through 2023 Transportation Improvement Plan, and then we also reviewed the 19 to 24 update because that happened in the middle of those meetings. As part of that, they reviewed all of the project purposes and the funding for each of those projects and discussed opportunities for funding on those projects. We also reviewed the pavement condition rating and the city's target for that average rating for the city overall. And then they met with Shelley and discussed and reviewed the potential future funding options. Okay. So with that.
All right, and the discussion points that we were asked to bring forward this evening was to review how the $2.9 million was applied to the 2018 street program, and that would be the $2.9 million that came out of the original ad hoc committee that was formed at the request of the Transportation Improvement Board of the council. Also to review the Transportation Improvement Plan and the funding schedule and projects, which will be very much summarized by Ingrid.
Very big overview. That was
Yeah.
about 7 of those 9 meetings, so.
Yeah. Discuss the pavement rating index. Ingrid will discuss that. And then finally, street revenue options. Okay. The previous $20 car tab ad hoc committee recommended that we take reallocate approximately $1.6 million of real estate excise tax, or REIT 2, from other capital projects that were budgeted in the 2017-2018 capital budget and apply that to the street program, as well as designate $1.3 million of general fund revenue to the street fund. Funding for this capital street projects, or these programs, was done in what we call Budget Amendment Number 4. It was passed last December for the 2018 budget year. So it was budgeted in 2018. And here's how those funds were applied. There's 3 projects that they are allocated to, as you can see listed there. And finally, there's about $680,000 that has not been earmarked. It's in program to be used for future projects, grant matching, whatever is needed or desired. And that's how the about 2.9 million was applied.
Councilmember Pelosi, I'm sorry. No,
Shelley.
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, go ahead.
Shelley, you said 660?
Well, it's 680. But I said
680, that's
About-
new program.
About.
So that's usable for council priority projects?
It could be, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, Councilmember Wells, I'm sorry.
Again, I'm assuming that the figures that are listed there just represent the city's portion of these projects, that these projects cost way more than this.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Yeah, the
because I
projects
need-
that those were allocated to were portions of the project. So the first one, West Valley Highway, Peasley Canyon,
Yeah.
that was a portion of WashDOT's project, in which we just did a small portion of that project. And then the arterial street preservation, that was adding 1.2 million to, I believe, I want to say it was an $800,000 project, so making that a $2 million project this
Yeah.
year. And then the 277th preservation was matched to a grant.
Yeah.
And so the remaining 680,000 that's there can be used to continue to match grants as we get them, as well as to do other projects. It is one-time money, so once it's spent, it's spent. Okay? Okay, so Transportation Improvement Plan summary. So I was asked to do a very high-level review of the Transportation Improvement Plan for this meeting. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was that in the new TIP, and the one that was just approved in June, we did do a renumbering of the projects to try to make it a little bit easier for everybody, the public and council and staff, to actually follow where those projects are within the TIP and find them a little bit more easily. So those are basically, we're identifying the type of project by the number that it is. So I projects are our intersection or signal or ITS projects, of which we have 14 in the TIP. Our N projects are non-motorized or transit projects, of which we've got 11 in the TIP. And remember, the TIP covers a 6-year period. P projects are our preservation, and we have 12 of those identified in there. R projects are our roadways, so that's our capacity and other types of improvements on roadways, and that's 25 projects, which is the most significant portion of the TIP. And then S are our study or our monitoring projects, so those are getting us ready for projects potentially to go after future grant funding. So overall, there's 67 projects in the TIP over that 6 years, totaling almost $200 million in funding need. So for the TIP summary, hard to read on that screen, which is why you have a copy in front of you. So this is just a summary of the TIP pages to show you both the breakdown by that type of project, so how much is being identified in each year of the 6-year program for the different types of projects. And then the second part of that summary is the funding sources. So what are the funding sources that we've identified in the TIP for how we can potentially fund those projects? Remember that the TIP is at the heart a planning document. It is not a budget document. So the first 3 years of that document are what we call kind of restricted funds, or funds that are reasonably expected. The last 3 years are not restricted, so they can be whatever we think we can get or what we might need, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a guarantee that those funds are going to be there. Okay? So within that, you'll see under the funding sources, so we have the unrestricted street revenue, that's our 102 fund. We have secured grants. We have a line item in there for unsecured grants. We have our traffic impact fees. We have traffic mitigation fees. We have our local street funds, which is 103, and we have our arterial street preservation funds, which is 105. And then we have the REAP 2 funds that we use towards transportation projects. And then we have a classification that we call other. We've listed those out by the different sources, so that could be WashDOT, private development, the Muckleshoot Tribe, Sound Transit, Green River College, identified in there projects that can benefit those other agencies that they could potentially partner with the city on.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Unsecured grants. Those, we've already applied for grants?
Not necessarily, so those are identified as projects that could be funded by grant dollars. So those are projects that we think could actually score for grant funds out of the various grant programs that we are aware of, but there is no guarantee that those funds will be there. So, and that leads me into the next part of this, which is what's circled up on the screen, are basically the items that are not really secured funding within that overall TIP program. So you have unsecured grants, and you have the partnerships with other agencies. So unless we actually have the agreements written with them, those are assumptions into the TIP. They're not secured funds. And right now, that totals about $1.375 million of that TIP, which is about 70% of the $200 million cost. In addition to that, we have the 103 fund, which you'll recall from the budget discussions, we had talked about needing to change for 19 and 20 how that project was being funded. So for 19 and 20, we are actually transferring in REAP 2 funds to make up about 1.5 million in that fund. After 2019 or 2020, we will need to discuss what do we do to fund the 103 fund if we keep doing that. So that $11 million that's sitting there is not necessarily secured until we talk through what is the next budget process for the city. Okay. Any other questions on the funding before I go to the next piece? Okay. So pavement condition. So I wanted to bring this back as a refresher. I think I went over this with the $20 car tab ad hoc committee. But this is a chart that helps illustrate what does pavement condition index really mean? What does that rating mean? So over the life of a pavement, you start off on the right side or on the left side of that where you're at excellent. Brand new pavement, you're at 100% or a PCI rating of 100. And as time goes by over the life of that pavement, it starts to degrade as it's getting used. And then it hits a certain point at about 75% of its life where that degradation starts accelerating. So the intent behind a PCI rating is that you want to end up being in the upper part of that curve, if you will, so that when you go and do the improvements, you're spending the least amount of dollars. So I have some estimates off of there that when you go to do some pavement work on a project that's in the area where I've got the blue text, that's about $25 to $35 a square yard for us to do that improvement. That's a typical overlay with a little bit of patching. As you start going down that curve, that cost starts going up. The next step is $35 to $40 a square yard. That's doing more significant patching and an overlay. As you get to the bottom of that, where you're into a full rebuild, you can see that your costs go up significantly, $160 to $210 a square yard. So the whole point behind having a PCI rating on average of around 70 is to try to keep the majority of the streets on the higher end of that curve so that you're doing lesser cost every time that you go and do maintenance work on that road, and you're not dropping into that point where you have to rebuild and spend the big dollars on that road.
Councilmember Wales?
So when you're down to the 160 to 210, that doesn't include the utilities
No,
improvements
that's just the
either.
road improvement.
Yeah, okay.
So with the PCI, so when we came and brought you the State of Our Streets report a few weeks ago, we went over kind of where we were at. So including that chart up there that the city's current target for our average for our PCI is about 70. For all of the streets in our system, as of the 2017 ratings, we are at an average of about 70 for all of the streets. And that's great. When you look at the details, that's where we run into a little bit of concern. So local streets, we're actually at an average PCI of 77, which is great. And so we're basically at a point where we just need to try to maintain the existing system and keep it at that 70 level. For the arterial network, you'll see that for our arterial streets, we're actually at a 61. And so that's where we are still a little behind in what are we doing to improve that PCI rating to get that up where we can actually do a better job maintaining it. And so that's kind of, for preservation, it's really whether you want to fund anything to try to improve that number going forward or whether we just maintain. Okay. So with that, I also wanted to bring up the charts to show what we have spent over the past years on preservation. So for the arterial preservation, you can see that we started that program in about 2009, spending about $1.5 million a year on average. Starting in about 2013, we started actually getting grant funds for projects, and you can see that in the blue columns that are in there. So you can see that we've supplemented our existing revenues with grant funds, and we continue to search for those grant funds and get those grant funds, but there's no guarantee that we will win those grants as they are competitive, and it is getting more and more competitive to get those grants. And
Councilmember Wells?
So the grants that you have listed for 19 and 20 are anticipated?
those are actually secured grants.
But you must be getting better and better at writing these. Are you increasing your skill level greater than your competitors?
No, we just, between 2019 and 20, so they did a 3-year call for grants. And so we actually won about three or four preservation grants in that cycle because it was covering a 3-year period. So, no, not really, but, and we do have one grant that we've received for 2021 that's not on this chart because the chart was made before that. But after 2021, at this point, we do not have any secured grants. And then just a reminder for our local street program, what we've been spending over time. So we started that program in about 2005 after the vote in 2004. And roughly on average, we've been spending probably about $2 million a year throughout that life of that program. This program is not eligible for any grants out there, so it's basically something that we need to fund in some way using city resources. Okay. And then the committee asked me to bring a more detailed map. So you've seen our PCI rating maps before. They asked me to break down one street section of that. The one that we picked was West Valley Highway between 15th Street Northwest and Main Street. And so you see on that particular street section there are 3 different colors of streets. There's the blue, there's the yellow, and there's the red. So what I've done in that is show you what the length of that street is for each of those segments, what the current PCI rating is for each of those segments, and what we are currently estimating in today's dollars the cost for those segments would be, not including the utility costs. So you can see as the pavement condition drops and goes to the red, which is the lower section, which is only 0.66 miles. It has an 18 PCI rating, and it has a rebuild cost of about 1.5, versus the blue section where it's about 1.25 miles at a 53 PCI rating, and only about $400,000 for us to do that one.
Councilmember Wells?
How do you determine the PCI? Do you drive over it, eyeball it? Do you have a machine?
Yes, all of that. So
Okay.
there is a machine involved in going through and taking some of the information on the condition of the pavement as they're driving the roadway. You also have technicians in the vehicle who are looking at the condition of the roadway. The PCI is really just an indicator, though. We don't take that as gospel that is exactly what that PCI rating is. Whenever we're picking a street to do, the first thing the staff do is they go out and look at the roadway to determine, is that really where that rating should be? Should it be something different? And what are the treatments that really need to be done on what stretches of that roadway? This is a rough estimate.
What's interesting here is we look at that red section, it's only 2/3 of a mile at a cost of $1.5 million. So it's huge. It's a lot of dollars for a short distance.
And then the total for just doing that stretch is 2.66 miles with an estimated cost today of over $2 million. And we typically fund about $1.5 million into our arterial preservation program each year. So the last thing I was asked to do is just kind of go through at a very high level some of the selection consideration process that we go through for all of our different types of projects. So you have the different types of projects we talked about before, the signal on the intersection type projects, the roadway capacity type projects, safety projects, non-motorized projects, preservation projects. For all of those, one of the first considerations is, do we have the money? Can we afford to do the project? What do we think it's going to cost? And not only do we have the money, but do we have any grant funds that it could be eligible for? And then what is the balance for the long-term need? So what I mean by that is we have traffic impact fees. That's one-time money we collect from development that we can use towards capacity-type projects. If I spend all of that on one street project, then I don't get to use that to match grant funds in the future. So when can we take those funds that we have and leverage those grant funds? And capacity projects and the traffic impact fees is one example of when we want to do that. So how much you spend every year out of that traffic impact fee might be great for this year, but it might mean that now we don't get another $5 million grant in 2 years down the road.
Councilmember Pelosi?
Explain that again.
So traffic impact fees are one-time money, so they're not a guarantee, they're dependent upon when development happens. As those funds come in, we can use those because capacity projects, those are projects that are most likely to qualify for grants. So we take that traffic impact fee money and use that as our match money to grant funds. So basically you're leveraging $1 million in traffic impact fee and you might be getting $3 million in grant funds. If I take that $5 million we have in traffic impact fees and I spend it all on, let's say, Lee Hill Road tomorrow and we build that, that's great, we've built Lee Hill Road, but now I can't take that $5 million and use that to leverage it to potentially get $15 million or $20 million in other grant funds. So it hurts us in the long run to spend it all down. We need to spend it, but we want to spend it appropriately and for the right projects.
Thanks.
Okay. So next one on there is concurrency for any of our capacity projects meeting growth needs. That's a priority for us to look at. We also look at safety improvements. What are the property impacts? Do we need to buy right-of-way? Do we need to impact buildings in order to do improvements? How many users on the road? What's the traffic volume? How many properties is serving that roadway before we look at what priority we put to funding those? Pavement condition is another indicator. Maintenance impacts, how frequently is our maintenance staff out dealing with issues on that particular road? Will it actually free up any of their time if we go do an improvement on that road? Permitting and regulatory requirements, so this would be wetlands and floodplains. How much permitting work do we need to do the improvement? Those are significant cost issues at times, so that can be a significant cost and time issue for us to spend our funds on those. And then what are the impacts on other utilities? So not only our utilities, but private utilities if we're doing a project. But a big piece of that is our utilities, and specifically the water fund. Can it actually fund the improvements that are needed to the roadway if we're going to go out and rebuild the road?
Councilmember Pelosi?
So I understand this. M Street Southeast. 4th Street.
Okay, I was really worried there for a minute.
I had a dream about it. So where does it fall in all this description, or does it?
So all of this applies to when we make those decisions. So if you remember from the memo that we did on 4th Street previously, we looked at several of these. So what's the traffic volume on there? What's the ability for getting grants for that roadway? All of that, what's the impact on the utilities for doing that road? And if you recall, it was about $4.6 million for that project. And I want to say 2.2 of that was from streets, 2.2 or 2.4, and the other was for utilities. So it's a significant lift to rebuild that roadway for a small amount of traffic. Yes, there is a condition issue with some of that roadway, but we have that in numerous roadways throughout the city. So you have to look at all of those things and what's going to be the best benefit for the limited funds that we have. Remember, we have a plan for $200 million, but we really only have maybe 50 to 60 million that we can actually play with over a 6-year period for doing those projects, and that's assuming that we get some of those grants and some of those partnerships.
So looking at the preservation state of page 4 on the bottom. So where would you say we are in the pavement condition index right now?
So if you turn to the next slide.
Oh, next slide. Okay.
This one, with the 9 up in the corner up here. So that is, as of 2017, that is what our pavement condition rating is on
Right.
average for those different street systems. So we have, our collectors are at 70, our arterials are at
Yeah.
61, and our local streets are at 77.
What I was getting at, Ingrid, was back to the age of the payment on page 4, that downward red line. So the longer we wait, the more costly it's going to be, according to this chart.
To a certain point. So at a certain point, when you hit that rebuild, it's not going to change the cost because you have to rebuild. So as you come down this curve, as you get to this lower end here, it doesn't really matter if I'm here or if I'm here. It's going to cost me the same because I have to rebuild it. But if I'm up here, it's going to cost me a lot less because I only have to overlay it.
So,
So once it crosses the line into a rebuild, it's an expensive cost no matter what we do.
thank you.
Any more questions on?
Okay. Funding options for the streets. Let's see. Okay. First, what we did is looked at the revenue options through the TBD. And you can see there are several under the legislation provided. The first one up there that we've talked about quite a bit is the license tab fee. About half of that is councilmanic. The other half would need to be voted, meaning it's $20. Another 24 months, council could, or the transportation board could levy another $20. And then after another 24 months, I think it is, they could levy another $10, up to $50 over a 4-year period. And as you can see, every $20 will get us about $700,000 up to a maximum of about $3.5 million for the full $100 per tab estimate. Then there is a voted sales tax increase for transportation through the TBD. That would generate about $4.2 million. There's several of these sales tax increases that have gone on the ballot and have been successful, and I think there's some even on in a couple of weeks here. The other options have to do with taxing the property. One would be via issuing general obligation bonds. I would like to note any board authorized bonds, then we would need to have a revenue stream to service the debt. So even though the board can levy up to about $169 million, or about 1.5% of assessed value, there would need to be an identified revenue source to do that debt service. The voted portion is up to 5%, which includes that 1.5% in the 5%. And so you can see there's quite a bit that could be generated via a voted bond, up to $565 million. Then there's a few other things out there. I think the only other one notable for this conversation would be a 1-year excess levy, and that would be the board would say, let's go levy X amount of dollars, and that would then, we'd figure out what that would be as far as a property tax rate. And I do have some slides to demonstrate what that might look like. And that would be 1 year, and the money would come in, and that could be used for projects or capital. Let's see. So again, this is just another slide showing the buildup of the car tab fees, what the potential would be with a 20, 40, 50, and then another $50 for $100, another 2.2 million. Then the 1-year excess levy would need to be voted. Also, this shows whether they need to be voted or their board action. We also have this, the sales tax that we talked about, the 0.2%, the 4.2 million, the bonds, up to 1.5% board but we need a payment stream or a revenue stream to service the debt. So this just shows you the method of what needs to be employed to get the revenue.
Councilman Pelosi?
So, the VFB, Go Bonds, is that considered councilmatic?
Well, I would call it Board-O-Matic because it's through the TBD.
In the TBD,
right.
okay.
So that's why I
Gotcha.
put the B there instead of a C.
Gotcha.
I thought that's kind of a cool word, Board-O-Matic.
Board-O-Matic.
Financial humor.
So this is what a one-year excess levy impact would look like through the TBD. The levy rate, what it would be, this is based upon $1,000 of today's assessed value. There's about 11.3 billion of assessed value in the city. This would be, say, on $6 million, it'd be about 53 cents. On a $400,000 home, that'd be $212. One time, one shot, 1 year. Any questions on this schedule and how it rolls out? Just to give you an idea of what a excess levy might look like and a voted levy would be voted. There's general government revenue options for transportation that could be used for transportation. There are councilmatic options there. Those are the Cs and what that would generate. Just remember, I'd like to remind the council that we just passed a utility rate study and an increase in these rates was not calculated into that, so we'd have to take maybe that into consideration. And then the voted options, anything on a private utility such as natural gas, electric, cable, telephone would all need to have a vote to go above the 6% that is currently being levied. A levy lid lift, every 1% lift would generate about $215,000. This next year, that would change as the years went on. This is just a one-year picture. And then, of course, this is your capacity down here that's left against assessed value, given the council can authorize up to 1.5% of assessed value, and about 47% has been 0.47% has been levied, leaving about 117 million, and the balance up with voted, there's a little over 2% or 130 million left available. As we have these conversations about transportation funding and we're talking about general fund revenue, we need to keep in mind that there's another bigger picture about general fund revenue and needs that we need to think about also. This is what debt service would look like on a general obligation bond, depending on the value of the bond, at 5%, 20 years repayment, and the cost per 1,000 of assessed value. And what does that look like against various home or assessed values from 350, 400, 450,000? You see the impact of a $5 million, $8 million, and $10 million bond. And this again is based on 2018 assessed value for 2018 tax collection year. Any questions on that schedule? There is another option that cities can use to generate general fund or general money in the general fund or for operations, capital, whatever is needed. And that's called a levy lid lift. And the lift can go up to what's called the city's statutory rate. And for 2018-2019 tax year, the city's statutory rate's almost $2.69. However, to levy that would put the city well over the 1% allowable increase. So our actual levy rate is estimated to be about $1.95 in 2019, so that has about 73 cents available. It needs to be voted, It's not something the council can do. And as noted, it can be used for any purpose and as stated, and is limited by the statutory rate. Should the levy lift be greater than the statutory rate, the assessor treasurer would halt the city at the statutory rate and would let the city collect over that per thousand. There's two types of levy lid lifts. There's a single year left and there's a multi-year lift. And it gets a little complicated because the single year lift could either be permanent or temporary, as well as the multi-year lift could be permanent or temporary. And I have some graphs that will demonstrate what that might look like. The one single year lift may be used for any purpose, no supplanting limitations. There's some supplanting language around the 6-year lift. And again, it must not exceed the statutory rate. So here's what a single year, one bump levy lid lift would look like. So the city would levy initially X amount of dollars above the 1%. And so those dollars would be levied, and then they could just stay there, and it increased 1% year over year until such a time when the ballot said it would sunset. In this particular demonstration, it's 5 years, and then the levy goes back down to what it would have been had there been no levy rate left, or levy lid left. A permanent single year lift would look like this. You levy your dollars, and then it'd be 1% year over year. A 6-year or multiple year, I'm calling it 6-year, that's as far as you can go. You can do less than 6 years. This is called a multi-year levy lid lift, but it's limited to 6 years. And the first year, again, is a fixed dollar amount. And the subsequent years are lifted by a fixed percentage rate, not the 1%, but whatever it's tied to. Previously, the city did one that was 103%. So the 2%, the 3 minus the 1%, went towards a street program. It can be tied to CPI. It can be a fixed rate. But it has to be tied to something. And again, it may be permanent or temporary. And here's what your temporary would look like. This particular one, again, is a 5-year levy lid lift, and it's temporary. It looks just like the 1-year temporary, but except for you get to levy those additional dollars every year. And then it goes back down to as if the levy had never happened. You just had a 1% year over year. And then this is what a permanent lift looks like. Are there any questions on the levy lid?
Councilmember Wilson.
Oh, well, I don't have a question on the levy lid, someone else has.
Councilmember Wells.
Oh, state, well, I can see why it took you over 9 meetings.
No.
And one last thing, I just have one more slide.
Oh, shoot.
And then if you want to wrap up.
Oh, I thought you were finished.
This is the last slide. The committee asked that we look at resolution filing dates and election dates. And this is through 2019 of when a resolution for something to go on the ballot to be filed and the election date, just for information purposes.
Councilmember Trotman.
I just have a statement. Being on this committee just really taught me a lot about how expensive these roads are and these projects are, and the money that's available and that are not available. And as the council, we automatically think that, oh, we've got a bond, so let's use that money. And these ladies worked very hard for us. Us three, we asked them to bring back everything what each one of us would ask here at the council. So to have them prepared to have this ready for us. And they were so quick to do so, and I just applaud them because they worked very hard for us. They had all their books and all the information and so quick to show us what's available and what isn't. So I just thank you ladies for teaching us and the value of our money and where it goes and everything. So thank you.
So that's why you've mellowed out? But, yeah, okay. How about this scenario? And this is just a hypothetical. Going back to the golf course clubhouse. Many of these people were not on the council then. So if you could just refresh us on how we funded the amount of the construction of the clubhouse.
Okay,
And then I have a question after that.
This is their councilmanic bond, and approximately $4.5 million went towards the clubhouse, and $500,000 went towards the columbarium up at the cemetery. And council did a councilmanic bond. It was in 2006, I think is when it was. And it is now debt serviced. It's serviced by general fund revenue. When we took the debt out of the golf course fund, when it was separate, we used to have what we call a business fund, an enterprise fund for the golf course. And the debt was outside of the ability of the fund to pay. The general fund picked up that debt service.
When will it be paid off?
Huh?
When will it be paid off?
2006 plus 20 years, 2026, 2025, in that area.
So leading up to my question, hypothetically, if council approved something like this, could we bond 4th Street Southeast?
The council could do councilmatic, voted bond, and for whatever the council collectively wanted that money to go towards.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do. So did the ad hoc committee have a recommendation?
Yeah.
You're getting into that now?
I'll get into
Oh,
that. So,
okay, okay.
So what I wanted to share at this time, again, thank you to Shelley and Ingrid for not only assisting us through the process, but putting this presentation together, because they did all the hard work. We just observed that. As we went through the process, we looked at the different revenue sources. And one thing that was made clear to us by Shelley is the real estate excise tax, the REIT, is not a sustainable fund. So that literally is not something we can rely upon as we go forward in the future to look at our options for funding. We looked at the car tabs, and of course we had great discussion on that during the $20 ad hoc committee for that. We looked at the sales tax process. We looked at the bond issuance, federal and state grants, which are not guaranteed, what we can bring in from there. And then we talked about the levy lid lift. One thing that was totally off the table was looking at a B&O tax. And it's something that may be looked at for some future need in other areas, but not for this particular purpose, so we did not even go there. I think one of the things that really stuck out in our minds was that when we look at, and this is under Ingrid's presentation, we look at the need of almost $200 million. And we look at what we currently have potentially in hand, which is about $50 million. So we have that huge gap that could or could not be filled in any way, shape, or form, depending upon what this council decides and the direction we want to go in with that. And in looking at that process overall, whatever we decide, we wanted to make sure that it was a committee suggestion, but a council decision. That's how we wanted to go with this thing. And any action that we take whatsoever can be done in two different ways. One, under the Transportation Benefit Board, we do it as a TIB, or we can do it as a council. And we're going to have a Transportation Benefit District meeting in January, I believe it is. February. No, next February. We'll be meeting again as the board, and then we can make decisions based upon that process of where we go or how we go or which way to get there, depending upon our decision-making factor as a Transportation Benefit Board. So with all that said, and looking at the committee overall, we looked at, again, all the options for funding. We looked at the huge gap and the huge need. We looked at the condition of the pavement index, including what Bill is looking at 4th Street and where that could potentially be in the mix of things as we go forward, including the $4+ million cost that will be associated with it. And we looked at how the pavement index rating has improved over the last 3 to 5 years to a point where we look at the majority of the roads are basically in, and I use the term passable. We had our $20 committee, but it's in a passable condition, and in many cases a very sustainable condition. We do have those outliers that are going to need total rebuilds. We're going to have those other ones that are going to potentially reach that point sometime in the future. As Ingrid reminds us, is once you reach gravel, you're done. So you get to that point where there's not a whole lot you can do, and then you're compounded by the utility costs that go along with it. And as Ingrid mentioned, when we look at the overall costs represented today, it doesn't include utility costs. So we have a lot of other substantial costs that will come into play based upon what type of work is being done on that particular roadway. So as the committee wrapped up, we took a look at the suggestion we would make to the council as a whole in looking at where we'd want to go. And our suggestion is that in whatever shape we take this, whether a Transportation Benefit Board or whether as a council, our suggestion is we do it under a voter initiative. Not councilmanic decisions, nothing other than bringing our measures forward to the voters and having them determine and decide where the revenue sources that we recommend in that action go, and whether or not there's a desire in this community for them to go forward with the authorization to give us the dollars to do it and to go forward with the projects. Again, keeping in mind that there's currently $137 million gap that we're looking at overall. And in that process, what we wanted to make sure that we presented is that any voted measures, like if we go out for a general obligation bond, we need about 18 months of time frame in there to properly prepare, to get things ready to go, and to make sure that we hit the targeted dates as up on the last screen here when we do, to hopefully make it successful. So, Councilmember Wales?
I think that we are in the position of needing to ask the public. I agree with that. Especially in lieu of the beginning of people starting to have to pay for the new schools and the remodel schools. So I keep looking back at that little dollar and how much goes to the schools. So I really support the concept of not only going to the public, but the length of the campaign. When we did Save Our Streets, it was a long campaign and it worked well. When we did a shorter one a while back, I think it was only like maybe 2 or 3 months, it didn't work. So the concept of a long campaign and a voter, I would like to see us also give some consideration to roads and safety and try to look at the needs of the police facility and courtroom. I think that when we go out there and talk to people, everybody is always complaining about the roads, though they really have gotten really quite lovely. But it takes a while to change perceptions. But I also feel with as bad as safety is in some of our neighboring communities, that we can really make a case for addressing what we need for our men in blue that do such, and women who do such a fine job. And that we're gonna have to deal with the safety one soon. And if we do this one and then we come back in a couple, I just think we'll look not as prepared as we could be, and maybe there's some way we could expedite an ad hoc safety group working with the money people and the police and dovetail them. Those are the two crying needs that I see. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. And I think, as Shelley mentioned early on too, our next big hoop we have to go through is our general fund. We really are going to need to focus very, very diligently on where we go, because as Shelley has shown us in prior presentations, is we hit that red downward curve and in just a few years. So I think it's these current council's obligation to start working on that now to prepare future councils to come in and have at least some semblance of where this could go potentially. So our revenue sources overall are something that definitely we need to focus on, including what you mentioned for safety, and perhaps as we go forward, as we continue to grow as a community, you know, looking at this facility and how this is going to serve us in many, many years to come as well. So I think it's a huge challenge we have, but one that I hope and I know this council would be up to task to do. So Councilmember Wales and Councilmember Brown.
Ms.
I'm
Wells?
sorry, Councilmember Trout Manuel and Councilmember Brown.
You said it very
I'm sorry.
well, Claude. When we decided to do this, we thought about our community. We thought about our people out there, you know, and the funds and everything. But Shelley did such a good job on showing us, and that's why we asked them to look at this so that we can do it in a long phase and make sure we get the education out there and get the information out there so that when we do come to the time that we put it out on the ballot, then we can be successful on the way that we would like it to be. But we did cover all of that, and I'm telling you, these ladies are the ones that came up with all of it and gave us the right tools, and I'm calling them tools for me because it helped me make a decision, and we three pretty much had consensus on doing that. So.
Yes, thank you, council member. Thank you very much for the work that your committee has done, and a lot of hard work that has been done. Now, I heard you say at the beginning that you're recommending, rather than council or board action, to make a decision on funding here to go to the public. I'm sure you had quite a bit of thinking. I've heard what Councilmember Wales had to say about it. But I'm curious, what was your thinking about the merits of going to the public rather than the council or the board making some?
To jump in just anytime here. I think a lot of this really hinged on the fact that we have such a huge gap, compounded by the general fund need. So if it was to be, and I'll use the word easy decision, we could come back and said, well, let's go out for a councilmatic bond. Let's just do that, okay? Or let's just, not even go out for, let's do a councilmatic decision and we go forward. When we looked at the potential opportunity for raising the maximum amount of revenue needed, to us it made more sense of looking at it through a voter measure. Let the community help us decide the direction that we should go in, and not just the seven of us saying this is where we're going to go. Let's have some consensus in the community overall about how we get there, but also emphasizing the tremendous need that we have over the years, which again hasn't factored in the growth yet in this community that we're going to be continuing to experience, and the needs and the demands upon that as a city as we go forward. So for us, it became more of a determination of we need everybody in this together as we go forward to help us with the decision making overall.
So we're talking the magnitude then.
Yeah, the magnitude. And again, emphasizing what Ingrid said, just thinking in the terms of currently $137 million gap currently, and that's
okay. That's great. Thank you.
And that made my decision also, because as council, we had a big lash backlash when we wanted to do the $20 tabs. I know I had a lot of constituents come to me and say, my God, we already got it from the road that was passed, you know, the tax that was added back last year, 2 years ago. And so when it came to our decision of having us to make the decision, I thought that it would be best for us to put it out to the public and let them make the decision and help us instead of it coming back on us, council. That was my idea.
Councilmember Pelosi, then Deputy Mayor.
So that's a good segue into what I'm about to say.
Oh, 4th Street? Darn.
I would highly recommend that the ad hoc committee, the 3 council members and deputy mayor, go into phase 2. Go into phase 2 and come up with a dollar amount to do what we want to do, and also a schedule. And I think that you guys you've been trained and probably engineering
Budget
brainwashed and financial brainwashed
With no
into,
Gantt
but no, you guys, and also I'd like to say you guys did a great job. I've been on ad hoc committee myself, but I really think let's save what you guys have learned and build upon that for a bond levy to the general public.
A recharge.
Yep. And could I just, one more, Mayor? One more, Mayor. Because when did we have that last big bond that failed?
About 11, 12.
Was it that far back? But, you know, now we got some schedule. We can hit every service club in this town, every nonprofit, bang, bang, bang. We could probably sell it.
I use a little acronym here, and I'm not going to use one word, but prior proper planning prevents bad performance.
Yeah. So, before I yield to the mayor, you guys accept that phase 2?
Accept that phase 2?
Sure.
Yes, we do.
All right.
Let's, Deputy Mayor Baggett, okay? Mayor Backus, and then.
Let them, I'll defer to the mayor for
There
this.
you go.
She's itching to say something
So
over here.
here's the thing. There are a couple of things. The specific focus of the ad hoc committee, we were really lax on it last time. So if the ad hoc committee continues, we have to have a very finite description of what the ad hoc committee is for. But if I could also ask for maybe just a little bit of a break, because if you recall, early in 2019, we are going to have to start those discussions on general fund that we have been discussing. So that we have been discussing that we need to come out and talk about options. So I would just hate to have you do a lot of work that is not in a vacuum, but kind of in a vacuum without having that larger conversation. At least maybe take a break until after the beginning of the year so that all of that conversation could kind of take place at the same time and not one before the other.
And we have to meet as a transportation.
A TBD
board. As well, which is also going to affect phase 2 of the ad hoc committee. So, Councilman Wills?
I like the mayor's idea of let's look at this holistically and make sure we get all the pieces. Because I don't want to see us coming back and always crying wolf, but I would really like us to consider the public safety building too. If we're going to look at general budget and we're going to look at roads, that we at least look at the issue of the public safety. We may then just set it aside.
May I say something? If you recall, we have money put into the budget for 2019 and 20 to study the
Yes.
public safety and
All
M&O
facilities,
and the court and just space needs in general, to find out what we need, what our options are, and get a plan together so we can come back to council with a recommendation and some ideas how to fund it.
And Ingrid, just remind me again, for where we are currently, we're okay through 2020?
So as far as preservation dollars go, we're okay through 2021.
2021.
So, because we have grant funds supplementing the arterial preservation funds through 2021. For the local street funds, we have budgeted for 2019 and 2020. During the budget discussions for 2021 and 2022, we'll have to talk about how are we funding that program and where that funding source is coming from, because as you said, the REIT 2 funding for that is not a sustainable funding source.
Councilmember Manuel, then Councilmember Williams.
I think that when we were wrapping up on looking at the schedule and everything, Shelley had mentioned on bringing in someone to help us on this as well. Is that correct? Does that?
Oh, if the council decides to put something on the ballot, sometimes it's helpful to hire a consultant to help you work through the mechanics of it and how to do the public education, which is a real important piece.
So I think that that's something that if we do go to second phase, to have somebody work with us on that, you know. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, I would be negligent if I didn't say this, so we might look at what the mayor proposed, the general fund, the roads, public safety, and 4th Street.
Councilmember Bowman?
4th Street? No. Thank you and your fellow committee members for your work on this. I think it would be cleaner if we thank you for work well done and you having delivered a finished product. Then, when the time comes to figure out, and we've heard loud and clear that your recommendation is we go to the public for a vote on this. I'd concur, because if you were to add up all the councilmatic things we could do, it still wouldn't make enough money to keep some of our roads from turning to gravel. Therefore, we have to bring the public in. When that time comes to work, say February or March of next year, then we reconstitute a second ad hoc committee, preferably the same people, because they've been trained up for it, to consider that as a separate issue. The best way to go forward with a voter bond initiative of some sort. That way it's cleaner. It doesn't look like we have a standing ad hoc committee. This way it's cut. Thank you. You met your deliverables. And then we'll reconstitute a separate ad hoc committee in February. And we'll see that in the records of this meeting, so we'll remember that.
I'm sorry, I keep passing over you, so yes. Mayor.
Most everybody has said a lot of information here about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And I first want to add, again, thirdly, add my thanks to the young ladies over here and for providing James with adequate oxygen so that he can keep writing those grants. But I really want to reiterate again, and I know this is old information, but just as a conscious awareness, we're good for 2019, 2020, and possibly 2021. But then we're going to lose out on a lot of revenue streams. We all know we're going to have to come up with some additional revenues. And when we do that, we're going to have to put our thinking cap on, and we don't want to have another back-to-back tax situation for our residents. But it may be necessary in order to get not only the roads taken care of, but also the general fund to make that solvent. Because a lot of the things that we're going to be doing here in the next few years are going to take a lot of money. So just be mindful that when we go into this phase 2 thing, we're going to be looking at not only the roads, but we're going to be looking at what we have to do for the general fund. And the question comes up, do you hit the public with everything at one time, or do you do it roads and then the general fund? So those are things to be thinking about, and the impact it will have on our residents. I think they're going to have to, we've got to tell the story, we've got to have enough justification and put it in the terms that they can understand, so that they understand. They drive on these roads, they understand, and they're complaining about the roads even now, not as much as they were before, thank goodness, but they're going to have to come to a realization after they see the statistics and the information that we have to come up with new revenue streams, and it's going to hit our pocketbooks, all of us. And if we're going to maintain our city in a manner in which we can be proud and also travel on and continue our performance as a city government, we're going to have to put it forward to the voters. And end of story, and I'll get off my soapbox. But thank you again.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you, ladies, for, again, your tremendous work. Oops, go ahead. Oh, we have just one item on the agenda.
One more item?
Well, it might be a couple. Discussion items. Councilmember Trout Manuel, did you have something you wanted to bring up during discussion?
I did, but after I spoke with someone who I respect very highly, and then I came down and I spoke to Director Jeff Tate, I'm going to hold off and bring this discussion at our next study session.
The only other item on here, I believe, I'm not sure, I don't think we have any new business. I'm sorry, Councilmember Wills. Yes.
I was wondering what our game plan was for our timeline for dealing with the letter that we received last week from some anonymous individuals making some serious accusation as to what may be going on at the fire department. So what is our game plan? So I was hoping we put that on the agenda so we can figure out how it's going to be investigated, or if it's going to be investigated, or what we're doing with the letter.
I would defer that to our mayor to answer that question at this time.
So first, it was an anonymous letter.
Yeah.
There have been allegations in there that have been covered in the past. It's not necessarily a public letter. And anything that needs to transpire, I don't think the city council needs to make a response, because quite frankly, you have no one to respond to.
Okay, so is it going to be investigated and then the things marked off?
Those are Board of Governance issues to deal with, not a city council issue.
Okay, great. When does the Board of Governance next meet?
We meet on the 13th.
5 o'clock?
No, that's the finance meeting.
Okay, what time?
It's 5:45.
Thank you.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Why do we receive that letter if it doesn't pertain to us council members?
Councilmember Trout Manuel, I can't tell you that. I don't know who sent the letter. But I believe other members of the member cities, the city council in Pacific and Algona, I believe, also received that letter.
Because when I read it, I was a little concerned, because there are some serious issues mentioned in there.
There are allegations.
Allegations.
Yes.
And so I'm going, why did we get this if it doesn't pertain to us?
So,
unless it pertains to some of our members that are on the board.
because the cities of Auburn, Algona, and Pacific are the member cities of Valley Regional Fire Authority, if you notice in the line, it said that it was to council members Board of Governance members, and others, political parties, I believe it said as well. I have checked with a few individuals and the union. The union did not send that letter. So there was no return address on the letter, there was no signature on the letter, and as typical, we usually don't respond to anonymous allegations. That's just not what we do. But there have been issues at the Valley Regional Fire Authority. Anytime that there is a grievance, those grievances are looked into by administration or by the Board of Governance. So that's where those issues would take place.
Councilmember Wales.
That's helpful to know. We just wanted to know that it wasn't, or I just wanted to know whether, because I know it's anonymous, you know, if there was a process. There appears to be a process. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's not going to be ignored.
Yes,
It's
okay.
going to be
Right.
handled.
That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Who's on that from our city council?
Councilmember Pelosi, Councilmember DeCoursey, and myself. So it's the mayors of each of the 3 cities and 2 council members.
Thank you very much.
The matrix seems to be the only thing we have left to look over, and we can do this very quickly, I believe. The only TBD we have on here is our usual identity theft. Do we have any thoughts at all as to when we might be doing that?
Give me a couple weeks down with the chief and our lead chief prosecutor.
Okay.
I have perhaps an additional item. It could go under any special focus area. I mean, I could make an argument that it belongs under Health and Human Services. I could make an argument that it belongs under Finance. And if I stretched a little bit, Muni Services or Public Works and Community Development. But we had a request this last year about potentially funding the Alan Moore Mental Health Hospital. That request is out there. I need a little more information, and that information would be, one, our present capacity at our local hospital. So we need a presentation from Multicare. I don't know who that individual is. And then we need to also look at what the need for a mental health hospital beds are. And that would, I think, best come from our police department. Need and availability. So do we need the extra capacity of Alan Moore, or do we have sufficient? Do we have sufficient need for mental health hospitals? It's very expensive to book a mental health patient into SCORE and the daily cost of that. This might be a cheaper way to go. I don't know, but I do need information from Multicare and Police Department. And where that fits in the special focus area, I leave it up to my colleagues.
Probably would be a good place to start. Councilmember Webb.
Yes, and I have some information that I can share with you that Multicare did when it requested its certificate of need from the state, so I can provide that also.
Be all part of the discussion.
Yes.
Any idea as to when you'd like to talk about that?
ASAP.
So it's
Right?
on November.
ASAP.
November 26th would be the next Health and Human Services. We'll see if we can get something
Okay.
by then.
We have to-
Sounds good. By then we'll meet, right? Thank you.
That was
I was
11:26.
hoping I could hand that off on Yolanda.
Thank you. That's right down my alley.
Councilmember Pelosi.
So in our 2-on-1 meeting today with the mayor, John and I were there. John brought up whatever happened to the requested funding for the Tacoma Hospital. And then we talked about various elements, filled beds over here at the hospital. What are we going to do with our citizens in Auburn that need mental health? We can't provide mental health services if we're full up over here. So we came to a unanimous discussion that we need to bring it up at a council meeting such as this, so that we can air it out and come up with some ideas to protect. My opinion is protect. I am again. The citizens of our great city that need mental health. And the police department will then have some assistance in dealing with mental health when they come upon those citizens that need it.
I believe most of the council had been privy to conversations with Ingrid Mungia that talked to us about what they're doing down there, the progress they're making and what have you, and the availability of those services to our citizens as well. So I believe that those that did receive a lot of that information, maybe it's time to brush it off and bring it back, and where we are with this whole project, and what may be expected of our city to participate in that process. Okay. Anything else to be added to the agenda for our matrix?
Which committee?
That's Health and Human Services.
In the salmon color.
No, green.
Oh, green, excuse me, I'm sorry. Green.
Green.
For money.
Green means
for
go.
money.
Yeah, but that should be green then for finance and ECDA.
Yeah. I'm sure everybody will be involved in this thing at one point.
Well, like I said, it could belong in any focus area, but it really is a health and human services.
It'll cover
issue.
several areas, yeah. John's right.
Just one more thing, since we are coming to the end of the year, we did add to an upcoming study session for council to discuss who is interested in being the chairs of the special focus areas next year, or if it's just a continuation of the current process. And also, I believe, but I can't remember which one it's on now, but determination of the deputy mayor for 2019 is on an upcoming agenda.
Any other items before the council? Well, we are adjourned, folks. Thank you.
Okay.
Great job.